What I'm about to tell you sounds like madness, but it shattered my life, or rather, my sense of security. You ever look at a skyscraper and think about how solid it is? All that steel, concrete, and glass? I used to. Now when I look at them, all I see is a thin shell holding back something. Something that breathes in the dark. My name is Alex, and I only worked 7 nights on the 44th floor of the Harmony Tower. That was enough. It all started simply enough. I needed cash, and a temp position opened up at Veridian Data Solutions for a night shift data entry operator. The pay was unusually generous, which should have been my first red flag. But I was young, and bills don't pay themselves. The building itself was a marvel of modern architecture. 60 stories of shimmering glass and steel in the heart of Chicago. During the day, it was a buzzing hive of activity, but at night, the tower transformed into a monolithic, silent mausoleum. My workstation was on the 44th floor. An entire floor, bathed in the soft, ghostly glow of emergency lighting, was all mine. The first night I arrived, I was met by the security guard at the front desk. His name was Frank, an old man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel grinding together. He gave me a quick rundown, my access card, and a walkie-talkie. "Communication is key, son. Can get lonely up there." I smiled. "I'm listening." "First," his tone became more serious, "at exactly 3:33 a.m., you take a break, 15 minutes. Not a minute sooner, not a minute later. Step out of the main office, walk down the hall to the elevators, and just hang out there. I don't care if you're finished with a task or right in the middle of one. At 3:33, you get up and you get out. You can go back at 3:48. I frowned. That was bizarre. Some kind of union-mandated break? A dry chuckle came through the radio. "Something like that. Just do it. And second, if you ever hear music coming from the vents, doesn't matter what kind, you immediately turn off all the lights at your desk, kill your monitor, and you sit tight, real quiet, until it stops. Got it?" Now I couldn't help but laugh. Is this some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy? A prank? The pause on the other end was long. "Just do what I say, Alex. Have a good night." The radio went silent. I shook my head, amused. Weird old guy. Probably gets bored down there. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I worked diligently, enjoying the quiet and the solitude. I didn't follow Frank's rules. At 3:33 a.m., I kept on working. And of course, no music ever came from the vents. I wrote his warnings off as the eccentric ramblings of an old man. Big buildings make strange noises sometimes. Creaks, soft pops, the thrum of water in the pipes. It's normal. The building is just breathing, my engineer father used to say. Everything changed on the 3rd night. I was deep in my work. The clock on my monitor read 2:17 a.m. Suddenly I caught it, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, over by the far wall where they kept tall ficus plants in pots. I snapped my head up. Nothing, just the shadows of the plants. Fatigue, I thought. I rubbed my eyes and went back to my keyboard. But the feeling that I wasn't alone wouldn't leave me. The air felt thicker. The quiet hum of the ventilation suddenly seemed uneven, as if it contained other, barely audible frequencies. I glanced around again. There was a stapler on a desk in the adjacent row. I was positive that an hour ago it had been sitting perfectly in the center of the desk blotter. Now it was shifted a few inches to the left. I got up and walked through the empty office, my heart beating a little bit faster than it should. "Get a grip, Alex," I said aloud, my voice sounding jarringly loud in the silence. "You're just tired." I went to the window. The city below was alive with its own nocturnal energy. It was calming. I returned to my desk. When 3:33 a.m. rolled around, I remembered Frank's advice. I don't know why, but I decided to follow it, just as an experiment. I saved my work, stood up, and walked out into the corridor. The light here was dimmer. I sat on the floor, leaning against the cool wall by the elevator bank. It was perfectly silent. I watched the clock on my phone. 15 minutes passed. At 3:48, I went back into the office. Everything was as I'd left it, but there was a strange smell in the air, faint, sweetish, like overheated plastic or burnt sugar. It was gone in a minute. On the fourth night, I wasn't laughing at Frank's rules anymore. The feeling of a presence was stronger. Sometimes I thought I could hear a faint whisper, like static electricity, but I dismissed it as the hum of the computers. A couple of times I saw a shadow dart behind me in the reflection of my dark monitor. Each time I spun around, there was nothing there. Paranoia. Classic case. Isolation and sleep deprivation do strange things to the human brain. I was trying to be rational. At exactly 3:33, just like the night before, I took my break. This time I left the office door slightly ajar. Sitting in the hall, I watched the dark slit of the doorway. 5 minutes into my break, the door slowly, silently swung shut. The click of the latch echoed in the silence like a gunshot. A cold dread washed over me. A draft? In a sealed building on the 44th floor? I grabbed my walkie-talkie. "Frank, you there?" My voice trembled. The reply wasn't immediate. "Here, son. What's up?" The door to the office just closed by itself." Another pause. "You on your break, Alex?" "Yes." "Then you stay put until 3:48. Don't go back in early. Just sit tight." His voice was calm, but there was a steeliness beneath it. He knew. He knew what was happening up here. I spent the rest of the night huddled at my desk, jumping at every sound. The burnt sugar smell was stronger when I returned. A pen that had been on my desk was now on the floor by my chair. The fifth night. I came to work with a heavy heart. I wanted to quit, but I needed the money. I promised myself this would be my last night. I'd work until 3:33, take my stupid break, then just pack my things and leave. Around 2 a.m., it happened. I heard it. The music. It was coming from the air vent directly above my head. A faint, tinny melody of an old-fashioned piano waltz. It sounded like it was coming from a great distance. The tune was beautiful, but something was wrong with it. The sound was distorted, as if being played on a warped record. The notes would sometimes bend and stretch, creating a dissonance that set my teeth on edge. I froze. Frank's words screamed in my head. "Immediately turn off all the lights. Sit tight." My hands were shaking. A part of my brain insisted it was nothing, just interference in the building's PA system. But another, more primal part, the part responsible for survival, was screaming at me that this was danger. I listened to it. With trembling fingers, I flicked off my desk lamp. Then I shut down my monitor. The office was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the distant city lights. I slid slowly out of my chair and crawled under my desk, pulling my knees to my chest. The music grew louder. I could clearly hear every off-key note now. It filled the space, pressing on my eardrums. And with the music came other sounds. A soft shuffling, a scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across the carpet at the far end of the office. Then a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone was walking between the desks, slowly, methodically. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears. I could hear my own heart pounding. The smell of burnt sugar became so strong it was sickening. I felt a sharp drop in temperature. The air turned icy. The tapping got closer. Now it was right next to my desk. I felt the floorboards vibrate. Then everything went silent. Even the music was gone. The silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, oppressive. I didn't dare move. What felt like an eternity passed. Suddenly, right above my head, something scratched loudly across the surface of my desk. A long, sharp sound like fingernails being dragged through wood.
I almost screamed, but the sound was trapped in my throat. And then I heard it, breathing. A slow, raspy inhale and exhale, right on the other side of my desk. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe an hour, maybe more. When I finally found the courage to crawl out, the office was empty and quiet again. The music was gone, but there on the surface of my desk, etched into a thin layer of dust I hadn't noticed before, were 4 words. You're not on break. I don't remember running down the 44 flights of stairs. I didn't wait for the elevator. I just ran. When I burst into the lobby, Frank was standing by his post. He just looked at my chalk-white face and nodded slowly. "Figured as much," he said, quietly.
I've never told anyone this story until today. When people think of fear, they imagine dark basements, ghosts, or masked killers. My fear is different. It smells like pine needles after a rain, sounds like radio static, and looks like an endless ocean of green trees staring back at you. My name is Jacob, and in the summer of 2022, I was a fire lookout at the Two Forks Tower in Shoshone National Forest, Wyoming. I went there to get away from people. It turns out there are things in the true wilderness far worse than people. The Two Forks Tower is your classic Forest Service setup, a small, square room of glass and wood perched atop a 100-foot steel structure on a mountain peak. The nearest road is a 10-mile hike. The nearest town is 50 miles away. My only companion was a radio, my only duty to stare into the vast expanse of forest, searching for the first wisp of smoke. It was the perfect job for an introvert reeling from a bad breakup. Peace, solitude, and the majestic beauty of the wild. At least, that's what I thought for the first couple of weeks. Life at the tower was simple and rhythmic. I'd wake with the sun, make coffee, and spend hours scanning the horizon with my binoculars. Below me, the valley stretched out as far as the eye could see, a dense carpet of pine and fir. I'd sometimes spot herds of elk or a moose. At night, the sky would explode with 1 billion stars you could never see in the city. The radio was my only link to the outside world. I'd check in with dispatch once a day to report all clear. The rest of the time, the radio was silent, only occasionally crackling to life with the chatter of other rangers. It started about 3 weeks in. It was a still, windless night. I was reading a book by the light of a kerosene lamp when the radio suddenly came to life, not with the usual crackle, but with a clean, steady signal. A woman's voice, devoid of all emotion, began to read a sequence in a monotone drone. 17, 8, Alpha, Horizon, 23, 4, November. I froze. It sounded just like one of those Cold War-era number stations I'd read about. A mechanical, almost synthesized voice transmitting coded messages. The broadcast lasted for about a minute, then cut out as abruptly as it began, leaving only the hiss of static in its wake. I tried raising the dispatcher, but got no response. The next morning, I reported the incident. The dispatcher, a guy named Dave, told me it was probably just atmospheric interference or a bounced signal from some distant military base. "Wyoming's a big state," he said. "You hear weird things out here." I accepted his explanation, although the clarity of the signal bothered me. Over the next week, I heard the broadcast a few more times, always late at night. The same voice, the same pattern of numbers and words, followed by silence. It became a strange, unsettling part of my routine. I started writing the codes down in a notebook, trying to find a pattern, but it was all just chaos. 9, 102, 0, mirror, 16. It was creepy,
but I was getting used to it. Just another quirk of living in total isolation. And then I started to notice the forest reacting to the signal. One evening, just as a broadcast began, I was standing at the window looking out over the valley. The weather was perfectly calm, not a leaf was stirring, but as the voice began to speak, 41, echo, 6, water, 19, I saw it. Directly below my tower, a large patch of the forest, maybe a few acres wide, began to sway. The trees rocked back and forth as if in a violent wind, yet everything around them remained perfectly still. It looked like a giant unseen creature was breathing just beneath the earth. The sight was so bizarre, so unnatural, that I couldn't look away. The moment the broadcast ended, the trees went still. I stood at the window for a long time, my heart pounding in my throat. An optical illusion, I told myself. A trick of the light and shadows. But I knew I was lying. A few nights later, the signal came on again. This time, I rushed out onto the catwalk that circled the cabin, binoculars in hand. As the voice began its recitation, I saw them. Deep in the forest, on the slope of the opposing mountain, lights appeared. Not bright lights, but faint phosphorescent glows. They didn't look like flashlights or car headlamps. They moved, coalescing into strange geometric patterns, pulsing in time with the cadence of the voice on the radio. They were dancing to this bizarre lullaby of numbers and words. Then the signal stopped, and the lights winked out, as if they had never been. My solitude was beginning to feel like a prison. I grew to fear the nights. The silence between broadcasts became unbearable, thick with anticipation. I stopped sleeping properly, spending hours just staring into the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The forest was no longer a beautiful landscape to me. It now felt like a living, conscious entity, one that was responding to some unseen command. The most terrifying incident happened a week later. It was a bright, clear afternoon. I was watching a large herd of deer grazing in a meadow below through my binoculars. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, the radio crackled on. The same female voice. 5:30, falcon, silence, 11. And then it happened. Every single deer in the herd, at least 40 of them, froze in unison. They lifted their heads from the grass as one, and then, in a creepy, perfect synchronicity, they all turned their heads to face my direction, to face my tower. They just stood there and stared up at me, motionless, for the entire duration of the broadcast, a full minute. 40 pairs of vacant black eyes, all fixed on me. There was nothing natural in their posture. It was like a horror movie where all the dolls suddenly turned their heads. When the broadcast ended, the deer shuddered as if waking from a trance, then scattered in a panic, vanishing into the trees. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just hearing a strange signal. I was at its epicenter. My tower, with its tall antenna, wasn't just an observation post. It was a receiver, a beacon, and whatever was controlling this forest, it knew I was here. I wasn't the observer. I was the one being observed. A crushing paranoia set in. I could barely function. Every sound, a twig sapping, a bird's call, made me jump. I felt eyes on me from the trees. I barricaded the trap door that led down the stairs. I barely checked in with dispatch anymore, afraid that using my radio would attract more attention. On my last night, a thunderstorm rolled in. The sky was torn apart by lightning and rain lashed against the windows. And in the middle of the storm, the radio turned on. The signal was impossibly loud and clear this time, as if the source was right underneath the tower. The female voice began its litany. 10, 0, 91, tower, 12. And then the voice said a new word, a word that hadn't been in any of the previous transmissions. Jacob. The next second, lightning struck the antenna. There was a deafening crack, and I was thrown against the far wall. The radio exploded in a shower of sparks and went dead for good. The room filled with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. As soon as there was daylight, I packed a bag and I ran. I ran the 10 miles to the nearest road without looking back. I never went back for the rest of my things. I told the Forest Service the tower had been struck by lightning and I couldn't stay there anymore. They decided I'd come down with a bad case of cabin fever. Maybe they were right. But sometimes, in quiet rooms when I'm all alone, I think I can still hear it. That same monotone voice, whispering numbers just at the edge of my hearing. I don't know what it was. A government mind control experiment? An alien contact? Or maybe the forest itself is some ancient, unknowable life form, and I accidentally listened in on its conversation. I only know one thing for sure. I was trespassing on its territory, and it knew my name. And that knowledge is the heaviest thing I'll ever have to carry.
Sometimes reality gets a hairline fracture, a tiny, almost invisible crack, like one on an old coffee mug. Most people never notice it, but if you look too closely, you can see something else on the other side. I know, because I fell into one. It started with gifts on my porch. Let me explain. My name is Tom, and I think I'm losing my mind. Or maybe I've already lost it. I live in what you would call a perfect American suburb. Neat houses, manicured lawns, quiet streets where kids ride their bikes. My wife, Sarah, is a lawyer who commutes to her office every day. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so my office is the spare bedroom on the second floor, overlooking our well-tended front yard. I spent a lot of time alone in our quiet, comfortable house. And that quiet, as it turned out, was hiding something awful. The first package appeared on a Tuesday in mid-May. It was a small cardboard box, wrapped in plain brown paper. It was just sitting on the doormat. No address, no postage. Someone had simply placed it there. I brought it inside, mildly curious. A neighbor, maybe? I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a small toy car, a red die-cast 1969 Chevy Camaro. The paint was slightly chipped, and one wheel was a little bent. I recognized it instantly. It was an exact, scratch-for-scratch match of my favorite childhood toy, the one I had lost during a move when I was 8 years old. I had cried for a week over that car. A strange jolt of nostalgia mixed with confusion hit me. Who could have sent this? My parents? No, they would have called. An old friend who found it at a flea market and decided to play a weird joke? I texted a few people, but nobody knew anything about it. I eventually wrote it off as a one-in-a-million coincidence. I put the car on a bookshelf and forgot about it. Exactly 1 week later, a Tuesday, a second package appeared. Same box, same brown paper. Inside this time was a ticket stub for a Smashing Pumpkins concert from 1996. It was folded in half, slightly faded. It was from the first real concert I ever went to with my high school friends. I was sure I'd lost that ticket stub years ago. Now, this was no longer a coincidence. This was weird. Deeply weird. I told Sarah about it. She laughed it off. Tom, it's probably your mom cleaning out some old boxes and deciding to mail you a trip down memory lane. I called my mom. She swore she hadn't sent a thing. I definitely wouldn't mail you old junk, honey, she said. The gifts kept coming. Every Tuesday.
always something from my deep, forgotten past. An old keychain in the shape of a spaceship that my grandfather had given me. An old broken plastic army man I used to play with in the sound box. A photograph of me at age 7, standing in front of my childhood home. A picture I had no memory of ever existing. With each new package, my unease grew into anxiety. This didn't feel like a kind gesture. It felt like surveillance. Someone didn't just know me, they knew my memories, the most intimate, insignificant details of my childhood. And that someone was here, in our quiet neighborhood, leaving these things on my porch. I started to get paranoid. I would spend hours staring out the window trying to catch the delivery person. I never saw a thing. I'd get up in the middle of the night to check the porch, always empty. The packages would appear during the day, in the brief windows of time when I was busy with work or distracted. "This is enough, Tom," Sarah said after a month when I showed her the latest gift, a mixtape cassette I'd made for my first girlfriend. "This isn't funny anymore. Are you doing this to yourself?" "What? Why would I do that?" "I don't know. Maybe you're ordering this stuff on eBay and forgetting about it. You've been under a lot of stress lately." Her words stung. She didn't believe me. To her, I was becoming a husband who was slowly losing his grip. That's when I decided to take action. I bought and installed a Ring doorbell camera. It was motion activated and sent alerts to my phone. I would catch him now. The next Tuesday, I spent the day glued to my phone. The alerts came in. The mailman, an Amazon delivery, the neighbor's cat. I watched every video clip. Nothing out of the ordinary. The afternoon wore on. I was starting to think the camera had scared the gifter off. Around 3 p.m., I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I was gone for 5 minutes. When I came back, there was a new notification on my phone. I opened the clip. The neighbor's kid rode by on his bike. Nothing else. But something felt wrong. I opened the front door. On the doormat sat a package. My blood ran cold. I watched the video again, dozens of times. Here is the empty porch. Here is the kid riding by. The next frame, the porch is still empty. The package never appeared in the video. It simply wasn't there, and then it was. The camera had never picked it up. It had never picked anyone up. That was the moment the real, clammy fear began to sink into my bones. This wasn't a person, or if it was, they weren't playing by the same rules. My paranoia blossomed into obsession. I stopped working. I would just sit by the front door with a baseball bat. Sarah started to get seriously worried. She begged me to see a doctor. "Tom, there's no one in the house. You're scaring yourself." The gifts started to change, too. They were no longer nostalgic. They were becoming malevolent. One package contained a dead monarch butterfly pinned to a piece of cardboard. I had a butterfly collection as a kid, and my favorite one, a monarch, had died, which broke my heart. Who could possibly know a detail like that? The next Tuesday, it was an old, yellowed photograph of my childhood home, but someone had crudely scribbled over all the windows with a black marker, turning my childhood home into a blind, menacing facade. I felt like whoever was doing this wasn't trying to harm me physically. It felt like they were trying to tell me something, to remind me of themselves. And that thought was the most terrifying most of all. Who was this old friend that I had absolutely, completely forgotten? The last package arrived 3 weeks ago. It was larger than the others. My hands shook as I tore it open. Sarah stood nearby, her face a mask of concern. Inside was a child's drawing, done in wax crayon on a piece of lined paper. It showed 2 figures. One was small, with red hair, like I had as a kid. That was me.
Standing next to me was another figure, much taller, drawn only in black crayon. It was shaped like a long, thin shadow. It had no face, and this shadow figure was holding my small, drawn hand. I didn't remember the drawing, but looking at it, I felt a chill that came from the deepest part of my memory, a feeling of something long buried and very, very wrong. Beneath the drawing, in shaky, childish handwriting, was a single sentence. "You promised you wouldn't forget me." Something in me broke that day. I didn't scream or panic anymore. I just sat on the floor, staring at that drawing for hours. Sarah called her sister. They spoke in hushed tones. I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was a whisper in my own head, trying to remember who I could possibly have made that promise to, and what that tall, black shadow holding my hand was. The gifts have stopped. It's been 3 weeks of silence, and this silence is so much worse than the packages. I live in a state of constant, quiet dread. I look at my own reflection and don't recognize the person with the hollow eyes staring back. Sarah sleeps in the guest room now. She's afraid of me. The most terrifying part isn't that someone knows all my secrets. The most terrifying part is that there's a door in my own mind, locked so long ago that I forgot it was even there. And now someone or something is knocking from the other side, and I'm terrified that one day I'm going to remember. I'm terrified of what I'll find when that door finally swings open.